Have you ever felt like something was watching you, but when you turned around, there was nothing there? What if I told you some of the most terrifying experiences come when you least expect them, moments that make you question everything you thought you knew about the world around you? Tonight, I've got 3 scary stories that will leave you thinking twice about the shadows in your room. These aren't just stories, they're nightmares brought to life. Let's dive into the darkness. I saw the job listing 2 weeks ago. Wanted, night guard at West Market in Redacted, PA, 12 a.m. 6 a.m. shift, 21 hour. The whole thing struck me as odd, right off the bat. What kind of grocery store needed a security guard while it was closed? Was the crime really that bad? But I needed the money. Badly. And 2 days later, after a phone interview with a man named Clive, I showed up for my first shift. As soon as I pulled up, I sort of understood why they needed a night guard. The grocery store sat at the edge of a rundown strip mall. Large signs reading space for rent hung in the store windows, but judging by the dusty glass and flickering street lamps, no one had taken them up on the offer in years. I parked near the front door, and as I approached the building, I saw a woman hurrying away from the store. "You must be Aaron," she said breathlessly. "The night guard?" "That's me. Clive left you some instructions. I put them on the conveyor belt at Register 1. She gave me a polite nod, and then stepped around me, heading for the only other car in the parking lot. "Oh, thanks. Be friendly," my inner voice scolded. "She's your new co-worker." I turned around. "Hey, what's your name?" But she was already diving into the car. The door slammed, the car reeled out of the parking space, and then she was gone. So much for a new friend. I turned back towards the store. The parking lot was completely empty now, and the nearest streetlight was flickering with an odd, erratic rhythm. A cold wind swept in, whipping a crumpled paper bag across the parking lot. Well, here goes nothing. I stepped up to the store. The glass doors squeaked as they parted for me, and then I stepped inside. Despite its outward appearance, the store was actually pretty nice inside. Bright fluorescent lights shone from overhead. Jazzy music played from hidden speakers. I headed over to Register 1, where a folded piece of paper was waiting for me. I flipped it open and began to read. "Dear Aaron, welcome to the West family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To help you, we've compiled a list of rules that should make your shift as easy as our fresh-baked apple pie. 1. As night guard, you are expected to patrol the store every half hour, making sure nothing is amiss. You may spend the rest of your time in the break room at the back of the store, monitoring the security camera feeds. 2. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. 3. If you hear a knocking sound coming from within the freezers in the frozen food aisle, ignore it. 4. If you see a shopping cart that hasn't been put away, please return it to the shopping carts at the front of the store immediately. 5. Do not be alarmed if you find a pool of blood in the meat aisle. Sometimes our meat packages leak. Simply head to the storage closet. Get the mop and bucket and clean it up. However, do not step in the puddle or touch it in any way. 6. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room and stay there until she leaves. Do not call the police or report a break-in. Do not make eye contact with her. 7. The music we play throughout the store is a pre-recorded disc of instrumental jazz. If the music ever stops, immediately go to the break room and stay there until it resumes. 8. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Thank you so much, and again, I hope you enjoy your shift. Clive. I stared at the rules, rereading them slowly. They were so weird. A woman in the store. Avoid aisle 7. I'd never been given instructions like this, even when I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in a bad part of town. Maybe it was a test. They wanted to see how well I could follow instructions, no matter how absurd they were. I looked up at the security camera, staring down at me from the corner. Okay, challenge accepted. I glanced at my phone. 12:06. Might as well get my first patrol out of the way now, before getting settled in. It was odd walking through the store when it was so empty and quiet. All the breads and muffins had been stored away somewhere. White, opaque plastic had been pulled down over the vegetable display to keep the cold in. When I got to the end, I made a right into the meat section. Sheets of plastic had been pulled over the meat coolers too. I saw flashes of red through the gaps, of massive ribeye and sirloin steaks, big slabs of meat with the bones still intact. I averted my eyes. While I wasn't a vegetarian, I never really liked the sight of raw meat. I turned instead to the aisles. Aisle 3, pasta and sauces, all lined up on the shelves, glinting in the fluorescent light. Aisle 4, cookies and snacks. Aisle 5, aisle 6. Oh right, I wasn't supposed to look at aisle 7. I forced myself to look down at the floor. Yeah, it was stupid, but they told me not to look. In the off chance they were going to check the CCTV footage later to grade my performance, I was going to follow every rule. I continued further into the store. A few minutes later I found the break room, a nondescript brown door with a little square window cut into it. I took note of its location for later. As soon as I was done with this patrol, I was going to break out my laptop and finish watching Friday the 13th at 4. And then I was at the west end of the store, the frozen section. I turned down the aisle, heading back towards the front. That's when I saw it. A shopping cart parked askew in the middle of the aisle. I huffed. Of all the rules, this was the one that annoyed me the most. I was hired to be a security guard, not a cleanup crew. Wasn't it the employee's job to put all the carts away at closing time? Sighing, I began pushing it towards the front of the store. The wheels rolled smoothly underneath me. The jazz music played softly in my ears. I turned the corner and walked past the cash registers, heading towards the front door. That's when I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the jazz music. I stopped, straining my ears to listen. Several seconds of silence went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying. The hairs on my neck stood on end. There's no one in here. The door's been locked the whole time. Unless a customer had accidentally stayed past closing time. Maybe that employee, the woman I'd run into in the parking lot, didn't notice them and locked up before they could get out. "Who's there?" I called out. A wailing sob in response. My heart plummeted. It sounded like a woman or possibly even a child. "I'm coming!" I called, breaking into a run. "Where are you?" They didn't reply. They just kept sobbing. I frantically continued in the direction of the sound, calling out to them, telling them everything would be okay. But then I stopped dead. The sound, it was coming from aisle 7. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. The rules had been very clear about that. I stopped just short of the aisle, next to an end cap display of mayonnaise, and carefully positioned myself so I was hidden. "I'm going to help you," I called out. "Can you tell me what happened?" They finally spoke, but they didn't answer my question. "Help me," the voice cried through more sobs. "Please." I wanted to step into the aisle. My foot was already halfway off the floor, ready to run in there and comfort them. But something stopped me, a gut instinct, a little alarm bell going off in my head. Because out of all the aisles, what were the chances this person would be in aisle 7? And besides, they were safe. They were in an empty store with me. It's not like they were in a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. "Come out of the aisle," I called, my voice shaking a little. "Then I'll be able to help you." "Please," the voice replied. "Help me. This is stupid. Clearly some person got stuck in here after closing time and they're scared. Just go into the aisle and help them get home." But there was another part of my brain, the instinctual lizard brain part, and it was screaming at me to not move a muscle. "Do you need me to call someone?" I tried. "Your parents or family? The police?" "Help me," the voice pleaded again. The "help me." It sounded the same each time they said it. A little stutter at the beginning, an emphasis on me. It almost sounded like a recording, or some AI-generated thing looping over and over. It didn't sound natural. "Come out of the aisle," I shouted. "Come out and I'll help you." The sobs got louder, faster, hysterical. "Help me," the voice pleaded again, in a desperate tone that made my stomach twist. I stood there, pressed against the mayonnaise display. Listening to them sob was making my stomach flip-flop. Even if it did sound slightly unnatural, I could call the police, I thought. They'd know what to do. Except I'd left my cell phone with my backpack at cash register 1, and getting it would mean crossing aisle 7. The rules didn't say anything about walking past aisle 7. They just said I shouldn't go down it or look down it, and I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. What if it really was someone who needed help? A child who'd sprained their ankle and couldn't get up? "Don't worry, I'm getting my phone and calling the police," I called out. Then I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold of aisle 7 towards register 1. As soon as I took a step, the crying stopped. Just like that. Violent sobbing, and then, in an instant, nothing. Like a switch had flipped. Then the footsteps started. Loud, slapping footsteps of someone running down the aisle, way too large to be a child, coming straight at me. My heart dropped. It's a trap. They're coming for me, and I'm probably going to die here. But as soon as I made it across the aisle, the sound stopped. All I heard were the soft jazz tunes playing through the speakers overhead. I hightailed it to the break room, completely forgetting about the cart I was supposed to return. Shut. The break room was small and cramped. The little square window in the door had been blacked out with construction paper from the inside. The only source of light came from the computer screen on the desk, displaying the security camera feeds. I scrolled through the feeds. I quickly noticed that none of them offered coverage of aisle 7. It seemed like the cameras were intentionally placed to avoid that aisle. After searching the grainy black and white video for anything amiss, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. When I finally opened them again, it was almost 12:30. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked up in this little room. But I also knew I wouldn't be safe if I didn't listen to the rules. I shuddered, imagining what would have happened to me if I'd gone down aisle 7, if I hadn't listened. I pulled myself out of the seat and headed for the door. The store was completely silent. No hysterical sobbing or pounding footsteps. I started my patrol near the back, walking up aisle 17. Cans of food glinted on the shelves as I passed, but when I glanced at them, I didn't see any labels I recognized. No chef ravioli or giant green men, just generically labeled cans of meat stew. In fact, all the aisle had was meat stew, the same cans over and over and over. I reached the end and turned right, towards the front of the store, and that's when I realized that I had already broken one of the rules. The cart. I hadn't returned it. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead of haphazardly parked near aisle 7, it sat next to one of the cash registers, like some ghost man was checking out his groceries. I paused for a second, hands hovering above the handle, then I grabbed it and headed towards the door. Outside, the parking lot was pitch black, not a single street lamp. The shopping carts are only a few feet from the door, I told myself. Just go in and out, it'll take 2 seconds. I did it as quickly as possible. I ran into the darkness, slammed the shopping cart into the row, and dashed back inside. Then I shut the doors and clicked the lock. Okay, that wasn't too bad, I said to myself, letting out a sigh of relief. For a second I reveled in the peace of the store, the silence, the safety of being locked inside with no one else with me. But then I stopped. The silence. Oh no, the jazz music wasn't playing. How long had it been off? I'd been so preoccupied with returning the cart, I wasn't even paying attention. I broke into a sprint towards the back of the store, cookies and snacks flashing by me. Then I swerved right and sprinted into the break room. I pulled out the list of rules and read them over again. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Why did he write that? Was it just because he didn't want anyone flaking out on him? Or if I left early, would some horrible fate befall me? Because I really wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out the soda I'd brought, and popped it open, took a sip, scrolled through the security feed. 5 more hours. Chat. The next 4 patrols went fairly well. The rules didn't say how long they had to be, so every 30 minutes I sprinted a lap around the store as fast as I could. The whole thing only took about a minute. Then for the other 29, I locked myself in the break room. On the second patrol, I heard knocking as I ran down the freezer aisle. It started as light tapping across the glass, then crescendoed into loud thumps, like someone was slamming their palms against the glass doors. As per the rules, I ignored it. I just kept running until I made it back to the break room. On the last patrol, the music had cut out again, so I quickly detoured and got to the break room as quickly as I could, the silence ringing in my ears. And now here I was in the break room with 3 hours left. I stared at my phone's clock, ticking slowly towards 3 a.m. I stood up, shaking out my nervous energy, preparing myself to sprint. I'd been a runner back in high school, but in the past 10 years I'd gotten way out of shape. The last patrol had left me panting and breathless, legs aching. My hand closed around the doorknob. My heart hammered in my chest. 3, 2, 1, go. I wrenched the door open and shot out into the store. But I didn't get very far, because there was an enormous pool of blood on the floor. I froze. All the air sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the blood shining in the fluorescent lights. The rules said to clean it up, but that would take at least 10 minutes. I wasn't safe out here. I swallowed. Then I hurried to the supply closet, got a mop and a bucket, and started cleaning as fast as I could. The job was messy. I slid the mop through the blood, then dunked it in the bucket, rinsed and repeated. The soapy water tinged red. A few times it splashed up and almost landed on me. But I did it. I cleaned it all up without touching a drop. Unfortunately, by the time I was finished, it was 3:27. Time for my next patrol. I was too tired to run, so I settled for a brisk walk around the store. I headed up through the frozen food. I noticed now there were handprints on the glass doors. Handprints of all sizes, tilted and smudged. Except the proportions looked all wrong, with fingers that were too long, too thin. I averted my eyes and kept going. 2.5 more hours. My footsteps clicked against the tile floor. The jazz was starting to grate on my nerves. I must have heard the same, looping saxophone melody 20 times now. It made me want to punch something. Sighing, I continued towards the produce section, briskly walking past the aisles. Then I stopped. Something caught my eye in one of the aisles. I backed up and took a better look. Someone was standing in aisle 9. A woman. She wore a blue linen dress and black high heels. Long black hair cascaded down her back, almost to her waist. She faced away from me, standing still, her thin white arms hanging limply at her sides. In her hand was a basket filled with cuts of raw meat. The rule echoed in my head. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not make eye contact with her. I slowly backed up, as quietly as I possibly could. Then I started down the next aisle, towards the break room. Click, click, click. I heard her footsteps echo against the tile. I hurried my pace towards the break room, but then I stopped. Her footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I averted my eyes to the floor, just as I saw 2 black high-heeled shoes step into the aisle. I stared at the floor. Do not make eye contact with her. Do not make eye contact with her. The words repeated over and over in my head, but I had to get to the break room, and she was standing in my way. All I could see were her shiny, high-heeled shoes, and the little drops of blood that leaked out of the meat packages in her basket, staining the floor. I backed up. That was the only way I could go. I kept my eyes on the floor, careful not to look up. But she was following me. Click, click. For every step I took, I saw a shiny black heel come into view, attached to a thin white calf extend, keeping time with me. I quickened my pace, so did she. Click, click, click. I wheeled around and broke into a sprint. Click, click, click. I ran down an aisle at random and sprinted towards the break room, but then, halfway down the aisle, I stopped. A shopping cart was parked across the middle of the aisle, blocking my way. Not just one cart, several of them, stacked up in a teetering tower that was nearly as tall as the aisles themselves. I was trapped. I backed away, my heart pounding. Click. Slow, methodical footsteps, coming towards me slowly like a cat stalking its prey. I took my chances. I turned around, sprinted back out into the open, and stepped into the next aisle. Oh no, no. I knew it instantly. A tattered lump of grey clothing and sickly pale blue skin sat on the floor. The person, the creature, the thing folded in on itself, in a pose reminiscent of a crying child. But it obviously wasn't anything resembling a human, with its strange lumps and appendages and complete lack of head. I'd stepped into aisle 7. I immediately reversed direction, but not before the thing unfolded itself and began to move towards me. I whipped around and, screaming, sprinted down the next aisle. Miraculously, I made it to the end in one piece. I veered sharply left towards the break room. Almost there, almost there. My hand hit the doorknob. I wrenched it open and dove inside. Then I collapsed in the chair, panting. I sucked in a breath, staring at the locked door. Am I really safe in here? Technically, the rules never said I would be safe. Maybe staying in here only decreased my chance of death. I turned my attention to the security camera feed on the monitor. It showed the middle of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty, no trace of the woman. I switched to the next feed. The produce section, empty. I switched to the next one. I jumped. She was standing right there, in front of the break room door. She stood so still, the image could have been a photograph, except for the blood slowly dripping from the meat in her basket. I swallowed and glanced away from the monitor at the door. My heart slammed into my ribs when I saw her shadow under the door. Go away, please go away, I pleaded in my mind. The shadow of her head in the window tilted, as if contemplating her next move. Now I knew why the window had been covered. I forced my eyes away and looked back at the screen. She was still standing there, except there was something different about the way she was standing. I squinted at the grainy black and white image, trying to figure out what was going on. When my eyes finally fell on her heels, I realized they were facing forward. But I was still looking at the back of her head, at the long black hair cascading to her waist. Either her hair was hanging over her face, or she'd turned her head all the way around. It must have been 20 minutes before she began to walk away from the door. I couldn't tell if it was just the low frame rate of these crummy cameras, but her movements looked jerky, her body lurching with each step. It made me sick to watch. When she disappeared from the screen, I let out a breath of relief. My hands and legs were shaking, weak. Okay, think. The rules said to wait until she left. All I had to do was watch the feed by the front door. As soon as I saw her leave the store, I'd be safe. After a few minutes of sitting there, waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, I forced my fingers back to the keyboard. I pressed the arrow key to move to the next feed, then the next, and the next, looking for the camera at the front of the store. No. Her face filled the entire screen. Her eyes filled me with horror. They were pure white, no pupils, no irises, just pure white eyes threaded with spidery veins. I screamed and jumped back. Then I shut my eyes. The rules said, don't make eye contact. Did that count? Through the screen, I let out a terrified, shuddering wail and covered my face with my hands, my entire body shaking. When I finally took a peek through my fingers, I saw her, rapidly scaling down the wall away from the camera on the ceiling, like some kind of spider. Then she pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the night. She'd left. I was safe, or as safe as I could be in this cursed grocery store. I glanced at the clock. 3:58 a.m. Time to patrol. I really didn't want to, but I forced myself to swing the door open and run as fast as I could through the store. I saw shopping carts stacked in teetering towers, heard hands pounding against the freezer doors, saw little spots of blood on the shiny tile from the woman as she'd stalked me. And then, a minute later, I was done. I locked myself in the break room and for the first time in years began to sob. The remaining patrols went by without incident, though I did hear more sobbing from aisle 7 and more banging from the freezers. And then the hour had come. 6 a.m. My heart soared at the sight of the pink dawn sky through the glass doors. I was safe. I was free. When I glanced out into the parking lot, I saw a few cars pulling in, disgruntled, groggy employees clutching coffees heading towards me. As soon as the first one came in, I flew out of the store, ran to my car, and got out of there as fast as I could. I'd never felt such relief, such happiness. I felt like a new man. All of my problems, even my financial ones, seemed dwarfed by what I'd just endured. When I pulled onto the main road, I rolled down my windows and flicked on the radio. But it wasn't my usual classic rock station that blared through the speakers. Instead, I heard the upbeat tune of a saxophone. And as I listened to that horrible looping melody, I realized that my days as a night guard for West Market may not be over yet. It's September, which means it's nearly my favorite season, fall. Yes, the scorching heat is at last cooling down to a nice middling temperature until the winter chills set in. All the back-to-school supplies have given way to autumn decor, such as fake pumpkins, rubber masks, lawn inflatables, and monster animatronics. Speaking of back to school, a bonus is seeing fewer children during the week. Look, I don't have anything against kids, provided they are a minimal distance of 50 feet from me, but when they are running around, screaming while their parents have this vacant look in their eyes, that's when I have a problem. If you happen to disagree, spend a few years working retail at Walmart like I have, and see if you don't change your tune. In fairness, that's only scratching the surface of the problems going on in those stores. As bad as that can be, it's harmless most of the time, only ever going into the make me want to rip my hair out in frustration territory. I can't say the same about what happened today. I work in customer service. Being Friday, things were busier than usual for us. Our manager, Dell, is the superstitious type, and he was adamant that we keep our eyes peeled for trouble, since it's also the 13th, while hectic. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, that is until we got one particular customer. My co-worker Steve and I were holding down the fort, trying to help customers as best we could. I was currently having my ear talked off on the phone. I've been a loyal shopper at Walmart for over 30 years. He's already mentioned this several times. I understand, sir. Things used to be great there until your generation decided to screw things up. I'm sorry you feel that way. Is there anything we can do to make it up to you? He went on a tirade that I wasn't paying much attention to, since it had nothing to do with the conversation. From what I remember, it was about those damn Democrats running this country into the ground. Several bigoted statements against minorities, how prayer should be back in schools, and that certain people need to go back where they came from. I should mention he was insistent about how not racist he was. I think there may have also been something in there against how communists have infiltrated the government. The call dropped, making me momentarily grateful upper management hadn't sent anyone out to fix the phones. Thank Christ, I breathed, putting the phone down. Tough call? Steve asked, unwrapping a piece of gum. Yep. I feel you on that. Any plans after work? I'm going to be watching a horror movie. Which one? It's called Teka Teka. Is that Japanese? Yeah, it's an urban legend about a girl who became a ghost after her legs were cut off by a train, and there are 2 movies about it. Steve popped the gum in his mouth. Sounds pretty cool, he said while chewing. Do you want to come over and watch them? Maybe. At that moment, Dell came over, a panicked look on his face. Is something wrong? I asked. Upper management is here, he replied breathlessly. What? We exclaimed in unison. Someone getting carts said he's parked outside. I knew something bad was going to happen today. I just knew it. All things considered, Dell is decent at his job, but when he gets overwhelmed, it's like watching a caffeinated hamster running around its cage. He stopped and took a deep breath. Okay, we can do this. Be vigilant. Steve, spit out that gum. Dell went away to check on the other departments. Rolling his eyes, Steve pulled out one of the trash baskets we keep behind the counter, spitting his gum into it. There tends to be a disconnect between corporate and those who have to interact with people face to face. As such, inspections tend to go as follows. They tell us to jump, and if we come back down without their permission, we get reprimanded. Our strategy is to remain as scarce as possible. Usually this works. Today was another story. Things were going steady, all things considered. Then the horde came. Normally these are seen further into the holiday season. However, it seems that Dell was right about how Friday the 13th would be affecting things. I was playing Pokemon Go on my phone when Steve nudged me with his elbow. I glanced up, seeing a herd of customers who weren't too happy based on their expressions. They seemed ready to take their anger out on us, hence why we refer to them as hordes. Oh shit, I murmured. Then she came. Looks of surprise were coming over people's faces. Someone was pushing their way to the front. We craned our necks, trying to spot who was trying to cut their way to the front. To our confusion, a pointy black hat became visible among the crowd. Attached to it and emerging to the front was an old lady in a baggy black dress with a long hook nose. People tried to tell her off. She gave them such a fierce stink eye they backed away instantly and dispersed. Then she came up to the counter. Hello, ma'am, Steve said. Is there something we can help? Reaching into her pocket, she pulled something out, slamming it down on the counter. It was a cat collar. Then she threw a $100 gift card beside it. A few seconds of silence passed. Then Steve asked, "Do you want to make a return?" "I want more than that for the trouble this store has given me." She explained that the adjuster was faulty and that the collar nearly choked her cat. "I tried calling and it just kept ringing." "Apologies, ma'am. It's been a hectic day. We'll do what we can to make this up to you." "Is that so?" A grin crept up her face, showing rows of deep yellow, misshapen, blocky teeth. "I think I deserve a little extra for all my trouble. Give me this gift card for free and we'll call things even." The thing about the customer always being right is that it goes off a cliff if the store's bottom line might be affected. Well, I need to check with my manager if I'm allowed to do that. Steve went away to call Dell. Meanwhile, sending a growing tension, I attempted to diffuse it. "Hey, great costume," I told the old lady. "Are you getting ready for Halloween early?" She seemed confused. "What costume?" "The one you're wearing. You're dressed as a witch, right?" Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not dressed like I am a witch." "Oh, I see, my bad." She relaxed a little. "I do have a lot of preparations to make for the upcoming holiday now that you mention it. Where's your friend?" "Sorry about that. Our manager is busy. I can't reach him," Steve said, returning from his call. "I'm normally not supposed to do this without permission, but I can help you out this one time." The old lady seemed satisfied with that response. Steve was about to activate the gift card when we heard someone speaking with Dell. "Everything is up to standard so far. Which way is customer service again?" "This way, sir." With Dell was our distract manager, Edmund, who looks a lot like Kevin O'Leary. He's the kind of guy who thinks the company standard should be rigidly enforced. In short, doing the opposite of what he says would likely improve store experience. They saw what was happening and came over. "Good afternoon, miss." Dell smiled and told the old lady, "I hope your needs are being met." "Yes, I suppose they are. These two are taking care of something for me," she replied, gesturing at us. "At least some people can do something right in this dump." "Well, it's nice to hear from a customer that our employees are on top of things. Out of curiosity, what are they helping you with?" Steve was tapping his fingers on the counter. He only did that when he was nervous. I could tell he was thinking. "Please, don't mention the gift card." She did exactly that, prompting Steve to curse under his breath. At the mention of it, Edmund decided to get involved. "Now hold on," he said to the woman. "How much did you pay for that collar?" "15. "And how much is the gift card you want worth?" $100. Edmund looked at Steve. "You authorized this without permission." Steve may as well have been a deer in headlights. "What were you thinking?" Edmund chastised him. "I was just trying to do the right thing," Steve replied before being cut off. "The right thing within reason. I thought you would have figured that out by now." The old lady interjected. "Wait a moment. Are you saying I won't get my gift card?" "Yes, that's what it means, sorry to say." Her eyes erupted with anger. "I came out here and waited all this time." Not accustomed to dealing with other human beings, Edmund disregarded her, trying to pass her on to Dell. She didn't take too kindly to that. "You respect your elders when they are talking to you." Edmund ignored her and was about to walk away. The woman crossed her arms. "If that's what you want, we'll play hardball. I will give you one chance to change your mind about the gift card, or there will be hell to pay." His response conveyed he wasn't the least bit intimidated. "The answer is still no." She pointed a shaking finger at him. "I warned you." Suddenly her eyes rolled in the back of her head and she began chanting. "I think she's having an episode," Edmund snorted. That seemed to be the case until the lights started flickering. An uneasy feeling worked its way up my back. Then all hell broke loose. Edmund was talking to Dell about his new car when, while cackling, the woman rose into the air, her eyes filling with inky darkness and her teeth becoming red and pointed. "I'll teach you to deny me what I am owed." We stared, mouths agape as things were rising around her and the lights were flickering. Several patrons pulled out their phones to attempt recording her. She wasn't having it. Different colored whips swirled around her. They made groaning noises. These must have been the souls of her previous victims. Pointing her finger at our Halloween display caused the souls to go into them. The lawn decorations came to life, fueled by the power of the dark arts. Next thing we knew, They were off their shelves and going after people in the store. There was so much happening at once, it's hard to process. The fake jack-o'-lanterns latched onto those trying to get footage of the event. An inflatable Frankenstein monster and mummy were picking people up and fighting each other with them. Lastly, a grim reaper was flying around, decapitating people. Heads flew and blood squirted everywhere. All while that wicked ancient woman was laughing as if this was the funniest thing to ever unfold. Several security officers who were at least 30 pounds overweight tried shooting at the old lady while she was distracted. Not even bothering to glance at them, she made several lights fall on their heads. Then they dropped to the floor, dead. Nearly shitting ourselves, we hid under our desk for cover. Now do you see what happens when I am denied what I am owed? Edmund replied, voice trembling. Okay, I'm sorry, you'll get your gift card. It's too late, you had your chance, now you'll pay. We heard him run away crying, repeating a bunch of curse words to himself. Suddenly, our desk broke off from the floor, flying through the air at unfathomable speed. Along this, several large and heavy objects were sailing through the air. Then there were several distant thuds. She's blocked the exits, someone shouted in panic. We're all gonna die, another person shrieked. Look at them squirming like the pitiful ants they are, the woman sneered, going after them. Seeing where she was going, we chose to go the opposite way under the assumption it would be safer. Help! Dell's voice came from somewhere amidst toppled shelves. We were able to lift the one he was trapped under high enough for him to squeeze himself out. Thanks, guys. Damn, this Friday the 13th. You do everything you can to prepare and you still get blindsided. We need to hide somewhere, I said. Let's head to the break room. Yeah, once she has Edmund, she'll probably calm down. Her next words proved things weren't going to be that simple. Where did you go, you sniveling little snake? There was only one person she could be referring to. If you don't come out now, I will destroy this entire store. Not being one to think of the well-being of others, Edmund stayed hidden. What do we do now? Steve asked, panicking. Dell slapped him across the face. Pull yourself together, man. We survived 4 Black Fridays together. We can survive this. You two, find Edmund and drag his no-good ass back here. You're staying here, I said, shocked. His eyes lit with a sharp determination. I'll be dealing with that crazy old lady. How? With superb customer service, take this. He handed us his phone. We went off to search for Edmund, having no luck. While doing so, we saw that the curse had spread, bringing other objects to life. Several people lay in the kitchen aisle with knives sticking out of them in a pool of blood. One person's hand was in a blender. Several of our co-workers were sitting huddled in pools of blood, hugging their knees to their chests, rocking back and forth. Another person lay in the middle of the appliance aisle with a waffle iron clamped over his face. The disturbing part was it still smelled kind of nice, like fresh waffles. This is fucked on so many degrees, I said, wondering how we had managed to survive up to this point, and worried that could change at any time. I'm with you. I'm applying to Target after this. Where do you think Edmund could be hiding? Steve asked. I don't know. A realization hit me as we reached the clothing section. Wait, duh, I said to Steve's puzzlement. The phone! Oh. Using Dell's phone, we called Edmund's number. Instantly, ringing sounded nearby. We realized it was coming from a changing room. Steve kicked the door open, showing Edmund huddled in the corner, fumbling in a panic to decline the call. We tried pulling him outside. No, she's after me, he whined, clinging to the doorframe as we were yanking on his legs. It's a bloodbath out here because you had to be a fucking douche, so take some responsibility, Steve screamed. With a final pull, the weight shift sent us crashing into a nearby display of horror and pumpkin shirts. We got to our feet. Edmund did as well. A They Live shirt showing the aliens covered his head. Snatching it off, he threw it to the floor. How dare you, he snarled. I am your superior. You'll end up in the prison showers when I am through. Before I was aware of what was happening, my fist was thrusting forward, connecting with his nose. I can't decide which gave me more pleasure, feeling the bones in his nose break, or seeing blood gushing from his nostrils, whichever. It will be a while before anything tops the satisfaction I was experiencing then. Edmund staggered back from the blow, pulling down several shirt racks as he fell backward. There was an expression of disbelief as if some natural order had been violated, and his mind was trying to make sense of it. My eyes went from him to my fist. Something to note about me is I am a non-confrontational person to a fault. Therefore, of all the stuff we'd witnessed that day, what I just did stood out as being especially unbelievable. Holy shit, dude. I didn't think you had that in you. Neither did I. We dragged Edmund to the front, where that elderly woman had Dell by the throat. They'll be back soon. Just give them a little longer. It's too late. We had an agreement. Her fingers squeezed his neck, making his eyes bulge. Stop, I shouted. Her head whipped in our direction, then her lips curled upward as she was lowering herself and Dell. Well, you made it after all, she told us, and then said to Dell, I guess you managed to survive by the skin of your teeth. Consider yourself lucky. Oh. She tossed him aside. He hit the wall, sliding down it with a groan. Steve went to check on him. It was now me, Edmund, and the old woman. Her gaze alone was piercing, and her smile only added to its iciness. Your manager cut me quite the deal. Not only do I get $400 worth of gift cards now, I also get to do as I please with this slimy little worm. Those words seemed to snap Edmund back to the reality of the situation. His breath hitched, and he tried in vain to flee. The elderly woman sent her souls after him, which wrapped his body. He was carried back, thrashing. Please don't kill me, he begged through tears. I'll do anything. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Edmund's teary eyes filled with optimism. No, I have a better use for you, the old woman said. What occurred next is something that's forever seared into our memories. She raised her finger, lifting Edmund. The inky darkness shot out of the elderly lady's eyes, spreading out and wrapping around Edmund. Screams erupted from within it, and we could hear the sounds of bones breaking as they were compressed and rearranged. The woman reabsorbed the inkiness, revealing what became of Edmund. A loofah on a stick matching the color of his suit fell into her open palm. I could have sworn I saw it quiver. The implications of Edmund's fate caused me to shudder. I believe that wraps everything up. Let this be a lesson. Never try to cheat me. The woman was about to leave. What are you? I blurted. Her eyes met mine, then she grinned again. I already told you, I'm a witch. She threw something made of glass down, shattering it and causing a green cloud of smoke to appear in the store. When it cleared, she was nowhere to be seen. I can't begin to convey the clusterfuckness of trying to explain what happened to the authorities. The cops around here aren't into doing their job when it counts, so they as well as chalked everything up to an act of God. In any case, that store will be closed for a while, which means we have to go through the pain of job surfing. Oh well, we can check out those Teke films in the meantime. I'll conclude with this. Never mess with a witch, especially when it's Friday the 13th. Hospitals to me feel like an extension of the afterlife. This is surely not an original thought. The long hallways, lined with shuddering fluorescent lights and medical carts, the somber staff and weeping families. It becomes a sort of limbo after a while. Not life and not death. Even when you finally leave, your clothes still reek of suffering. Sitting in the waiting room, I felt like there was nothing outside of these walls. Nothing but an eternal black void. My phone buzzed loudly against an uncomfortable plastic chair, and I raised my hand to the receptionist as if to apologize. I sent the caller to voicemail without even checking the contact. Mr. Sharp. The doctor's voice cut through the suffocating quiet of the wide hall, and I sat up, adjusting my shirt that had bunched up around my waist from slouching. That's me. He was pushing a wheelchair, and I smiled when I saw my wife, sitting upright and smiling back. Tired, but overall normal. I stood, giving her a quick hug and a kiss on top of her head. Mr. Sharp, your wife is doing just fine, the doctor told me, looking between us. I sighed. Thank God, I was sure it would be much worse. Well? The doctor glanced around us at the nearly empty waiting room, as if he didn't want to be overheard. There's something I'd like to speak with you about. I frowned. Yes? It's her eyes. I took a step back and got a better look at Dahlia. She was wearing her clothes from home. The ones I had brought her, considering the ones she'd come in, had been drenched in blood and green paint, and other than a bandage around her head, she looked normal. Take a closer look, the doctor said, as if he had read my mind. I leaned in closer, examining my wife's face. I gazed into her blue eyes, and my heart sank. Instead of only one pupil in each, there were two. They looked strange and almost wispy, and they appeared to bulge against the edge of her irises like they were stretching them out. I gasped. I didn't know how I hadn't noticed before. They made her look alien. "We need to do more tests," the doctor muttered as I stared, mystified, into Dahlia's eyes. It must have been the blunt trauma from her fall that caused this. Normally we would label this condition polychoria, however. "Normally," I interrupted, my tone brisk. I felt a little unsteady on my feet. "However," he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "that condition is very rare, and I haven't seen it caused by trauma before. Usually one would be born with something like this, rather than it developing. We need to make several follow-up appointments. But her vision seems fine, and besides that, she only needs to rest and get back to her life." "Are you serious?" I looked around at the patients and their families who were now staring. I lowered my voice into a hiss. "She looks like a monster. She can't just be okay." Dahlia took my hand. I took a deep breath, trying to self-regulate, for her sake. "Honey," she said softly, pressing my hand against her cheek. "I'm fine, I promise. I feel fine. And the doctors are very nice. They're going to figure it out. Look at me." I looked at her again, trying not to panic at her otherworldly appearance. "I'm fine," she said again, giving me a gentle smile. I straightened up, getting a hold of myself. I chose to believe her. "I'm sorry," I mumbled in the doctor's direction. "I'm sorry, I'm just tense. This has all been a lot." "I completely understand. Both of you need some rest, I would say." He couldn't have been more right. My own eyes didn't feel normal, like there were strings holding them open. I felt like I had been in this hospital for years, even though it had only been a few days. I couldn't imagine how my wife felt. I helped her to the car. The doctors wouldn't let her walk, not until she was off their property, even though she insisted she was able to. On the drive home we were quiet, but I took her hand, squeezing it occasionally. We were both a little in shock, I think. When we got home, we both stopped in the living room. I hadn't been home long enough to clean, and the sight of the toppled ladder laying beside the pool of dried blood must have been a lot to process. She stared for a long moment, blinking her new eyes. "Is this the color we chose?" she asked finally. She bent over, picking up the dried-up paint roller off the floor and taking a closer look. I stared at her, incredulous. I couldn't believe that, over everything else, was what she was thinking about right now. "Yes, honey," I told her, wrapping my arm around her waist hesitantly, as if she might shatter like glass. "October mist, remember?" "Huh," she mumbled, shaking her head. "All right." I guided her to our bed, and she pulled the heavy duvet over herself, letting out a breath like she'd been holding it for days. "Sorry about all this," she whispered after a while, clearly only half awake. I chuckled. "Don't be sorry, my love, I'm sorry." She didn't respond, falling asleep as quickly as she had fallen off of that ladder. When my wife finally woke up again, late into the afternoon the next day, I was long past done cleaning up the living room, and I was waiting with the kettle running and her bottle of pain medication. I poured her a mug of Earl Grey, and I stared at her as she blew on it, taking her usual seat at the kitchen table. Her eyes were no less jarring than they had been the day before. I felt like I couldn't look at her. Like every time those second pupils fixed on me, something squirmed in my stomach, something deeply wrong. "How are you feeling?" I asked when she finally looked up at me, not wanting to make her feel insecure about her condition. "I feel good," she told me, and she smiled. Somehow she looked even happier now than she had before the accident. I bit my tongue, just barely able to stop myself from blurting out, "Why?" "Really?" "Yes," she sipped her tea. "I mean, my head hurts a little, but I feel good. I feel like I've woken up from a long dream." Her words made me feel uneasy. I laughed nervously. "Well, you were asleep for a while." She laughed too and shook her head. "Not that kind of dream, Ben." Dahlia almost seemed giddy. Now that she wasn't tired anymore, she was more lively than ever, and she kept looking around as if she were a child seeing the world for the first time. I only realized why when we stepped outside for our usual late afternoon walk. I had wanted her to rest longer, but she insisted that she wanted to. Dahlia gasped, and her hands flew to her mouth. "It's beautiful!" I followed her gaze to the orange and pink sunset, just beginning to creep up above the trees and houses of our neighborhood. It was pretty, sure, but nothing we hadn't seen before. Her pupils, all four of them, widened, swelling into each other. I winced. "I know this sounds strange, but everything seems brighter," she told me, practically skipping down our front steps. "All the colors are more vivid. I feel like my vision is even better than before. This must be incredibly rare, don't you think?" I bit the inside of my cheek, trailing after her warily. "That's great, honey. I'm so glad it's not worse. You really could have lost your vision." She didn't seem like she was even listening. She led me like a stray dog down the street, pointing things out to me that I never would have noticed before. How the neighbor's doorknob was a vastly clashing shade of yellow to their red door, the oil slick shimmering on the feathers of the crows, all the spots where graffiti had been painted over again and again that seemed impossible to spot with the naked eye. It gave me such a strange, sick feeling. I couldn't name it, but my wife was so happy, so who was I to bring her down? I truly felt that way until a few days later. My wife shifted and yawned as she woke up, rolling to face me, and I could barely keep myself from screaming. Dahlia had 3 pupils in each eye now, like 3 black holes, shrunken from the light streaming through our bedroom windows. Her irises looked pinker than before, as if they were cracking from the pressure of holding them in, keeping them from spilling into the whites of her eyes. It was unnatural. I sped to the hospital, my wife protesting the entire way. I ignored her. This wasn't right, it wasn't normal, and something had to be done. I stayed with her as they checked her vitals and shone lights in her eyes. I had to look away as her pupils widened and contracted, just like regular eyes. It made me feel nauseous or like I might faint. They tested her vision again. I watched the doctor's face carefully as she finished each trial, but he was surely being cautious not to give anything away. He just nodded and moved on each time. Finally, he sat back in his seat, scratching at his head with the capped end of a pen. "I don't know what to tell you," he said, shaking his head. "Mrs. Sharp, your vision is amazing. You have 20/10 vision in both of your eyes. How is that possible?" I looked between both of them, shocked. The doctor looked confused, but my wife only looked ecstatic. She only had 20/40 last time she checked. She needed reading glasses. The doctor shrugged, checking his records. "Like I said, I don't know what to tell you. I think all we can do is give it some time and keep watching it closely. Come back in if anything changes." He sent us away. I couldn't believe it. There was no way this was happening. On top of it all, my wife didn't seem alarmed in the slightest. She looked from wall to wall like she was taking everything in, like she was absorbing it. "This waiting room is very dirty," she whispered to me absent-mindedly as I pushed open the front door for her. By the time we got home, however, she felt a bit differently. She slumped into my side, her eyelids drooping. "I'm feeling very overwhelmed," she told me. "I think I need to rest my eyes for a little bit." I felt a bit relieved. Finally, she would show the symptoms of what she had been through. Finally, everything would feel a little bit normal. But again, that didn't last very long. She woke up energized in the morning, and she asked me to take her on a drive. I resisted at first, but she pleaded with me, and eventually I gave in. While we drove, she described things that I couldn't see. She told me there were colors that she hadn't even known existed, colors she would never be able to explain. Greenish, bluish, purplish, orangish things, colors that didn't make any sense. She said she could see the UV in the air, flickering and swimming across her vision like strange alien moths. She told me she felt like she could see the worms moving beneath the ground and the birds flying far above the clouds. She seemed almost manic with glee over this. I felt extremely uncomfortable, but I listened to her ranting nonetheless. When we got back home, she said the car door handle was coated in germs, so I opened it for her. The next day, Dahlia woke up with 5 pupils in each eye. The skin around them was red and swollen, as if she'd been crying or violently rubbing at them. She wailed at me to get away from her, to get out. I nearly tripped backing out of our bedroom, my eyes welling up with tears. I sprinted downstairs and I called an ambulance. As they wheeled her into the ambulance on a stretcher, her arms and legs strapped down to minimize her thrashing. I got another good look at her face. She glared at me with blazing hatred, and her eyes reminded me of the eyes of a fly. They made me feel itchy somewhere beneath my skin. That was not my wife, my beautiful, sweet wife. That was something else, someone else, someone I didn't know. They kept her for a while. When I got to the hospital, they told me they would keep me updated, but it would be best if I went back home and waited for news. I got many calls those next few days, all of which I sent to voicemail because they weren't from the hospital. I cried and paced and tried to distract myself, none of which helped. I cursed the broken ladder in our garage for not working properly. I prayed. Finally, I got the call. I could come and see her. I packed an overnight bag and I made my way there, running through multiple red lights in the process. They had taken Dahlia to a mental wing of the hospital this time. Somehow, this section felt even more like some strange limbo. Despite my rush to get here, I found myself walking slower down those halls, feeling afraid to make any loud noises and disrupt the stiff silence. The nurse who had taken me to her squeezed my shoulder when we arrived, and she left me alone with her. I stood in the doorway, just looking at her for a long time. My wife was sitting up in her hospital bed, looking back at me. Her hair looked mousy and unwashed. Her face was red and rashy. It looked like she'd been scratching at it. Her wrists were red too, from her restraints that were no longer holding her. She was calm. At first I thought her eyes were completely black. With closer inspection, though, I found that wasn't the case. I couldn't count how many pupils she had. I could only guess maybe somewhere in the 20s. They all fought against each other, moving together, swelling in her skull like some kind of breathing hive. Some were broken or wispy, like they hadn't fully developed, or glossy and merged into each other like an embryo. Her eyes were no longer blue. "Hi, Benjamin." She spoke finally, her voice raspy from screaming. I frowned. She never called me Benjamin, only Ben. When we had met, she told me she didn't like it, that it felt too formal, like we were strangers. "Hi, honey," I said softly, carefully. I went to approach her bed, but she held out a hand, stopping me in my tracks. How are you feeling?" That was when she smiled. It was not her normal smile. Her smile was twisted, unfurling up her cheeks like cracked leather. It looked painful and strained. It looked unnatural. "I feel beautiful, Benjamin. I can see everything." I swallowed. "What do you mean you can see everything, my love?" I found myself talking to her as if she was a child, like I was humoring her. In my defense, at that time, I thought she might have completely lost it. She shifted in her bed, but her smile didn't falter for a second. "Everything, honey," she repeated slowly, and her voice made me shiver. The air in the room felt hot and stuffy, like any airflow that had existed before had been gone for decades. "I can see everything, and I know everything." She raised a hand, pointing a finger at me. "I can see through your skin, my love, and into your bones, and I can see your heart pumping your filthy blood through your filthy veins. I can see through everything that you are and ever have been. I can see from your mother's womb to your unmarked gravestone. I can see into the fabric of your universe. Honey." She spoke the pet names like she was mocking me, belittling me. I just stared at her, shocked into silence for a moment. "You're just sick," I told her, my brow furrowing. "You're going to get better, Dahlia. You just need rest." "No!" she shouted, the word sharp and cutting. "No! You are the one who is sick. You will see what happens to sick men like you." "What do you mean?" My voice was shaky, and now I felt cold. I cleared my throat. Her smile only seemed to widen, and what she said next made me feel lightheaded. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I can't see you taking those screws out of that ladder?" I froze. My hands trembled. "What are you talking about? Do you think I don't know why you did it? Does she know about me?" I didn't say anything else. I stared at her for another few seconds, like my feet were glued to the ground, and then I turned on my heel, and I ran. I ran out of the hospital, ignoring the nurses and the receptionist calling out to me to come back. I burst out of the door into the cool evening air, my muscles screaming, and only then did I dare to look back. I had half expected her to be behind me, chasing me, her eyes wide and bulging and her teeth sharp. Nothing. There was no one. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out, cursing loudly, and sent the call to voicemail. Then fear struck me again. I swiped to my unopened voicemails, and I pressed on my oldest one, the one from that day when I was waiting for my wife to be ready to go home after her accident. My hands shook uncontrollably, and I had to hold on with both of them to keep from dropping my phone. "Hi, baby. Are you busy? I know you said not to call you at this number. I wish you would answer me. Something's going on. I don't know. Maybe I'm just sick or something. Something's going on with my eyes." So there you have it. 3 stories that make you question what's lurking in the dark corners of your life. Next time you hear a knock, see a shadow, or catch a glimpse of something in the mirror, take a closer look. You never know what might be staring back. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.